Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. And today, this is going to be the third part of my intro to Magic. And it's simply going to be the phases of a turn. So this is how you're going to take your first turn. So depending on the type of play you've chosen, we'll just say we're in a duel. So you got your 60 card deck. That's the minimum amount of cards you can have in a deck. And I'm just shuffling because I'm used to it. That's what I do all the time. But this is a side shuffle. I just cut the deck in half and then push them into each other. There's many ways to shuffle. That's the way I like to shuffle. So you got your 60 card deck. It's got at least 24 lands. It's got some creatures. It's got artifacts. It's got enchantments. You know, all the card types we talked about before. So you want to, the first thing you want to do, like I said, is shuffle. Then you want to present your deck to your opponent. Ask them to cut. And then, you know, if they trust you, they will. Sometimes they don't cut it. But most of the time they will cut. And then the next thing you want to do is draw your hand. So you can only have 7 cards in your hand at the end of your turn. And everybody's going to look at my hand because we're learning today. And usually you want to have a hand with at least 2 lands in it. Can you pick out how many lands I have? Your answer should be 3. Because we got an island, we got a swamp, and we got a land that has 2 colors. This is called a non-basic land. This particular one is called choked estuary. And it says, as it enters the battlefield, you may reveal an island or swamp card from your hand. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. So let's pretend we're going to the beginning of our turn, which is called the beginning phase. And we don't have anything to untap right now, but we have to acknowledge that the untap step is there. And then the next phase is called upkeep. And there's a certain amount of things that happen during upkeep. Most of the time it's nothing, unless you're advanced. I mean, upkeep is reserved, I think, for advanced players. We'll talk more about it in the future. And since this is a hypothetical duel, we'll say that we let our opponent go first. And the next phase of our turn would be to draw. So you got your initial 7, and then in a duel only, on the first turn you don't draw. But like I said, we're pretending that our opponent went first, and we're going to draw. And so I want to go ahead and play. See, my deck is 2 colors, but we only got blue cards in my hand. So we want to be able to have as much blue mana as possible, and potentially black mana. So I would say I want to play a land, and I have to reveal an island or a swamp from my hand. So I would reveal whichever one, the swamp or the island. And then it would come in untapped. There's nothing we want to play right now. So I technically didn't have to reveal an island or a swamp, because you don't want to give your opponent any knowledge that isn't demanded. You know, you don't want to give them any extra information, because you want them to be as clueless as possible, because that's what helps you win the game. Alright, so I forgot to tell you, after draw we went to our first main phase, and that's when we're supposed to play a land. And then after your main phase, well, actually I should tell you what you can do in your main phase. So you can play a land, you can cast any spell, You can activate abilities of planeswalkers, and triggers can happen. Like I said, well, this is just an introduction. We'll go into it more into depth. And then the next part of your turn would be combat, but we don't have any creatures yet. And then you get a second main phase. And then the end of your turn. And then there's the cleanup. And a bunch of stuff happens then, but let's just say, because we only got one card down, it's our next turn. Like, our opponent just played a land, and now it's our turn again. So we're going to draw. So untap. We didn't have anything tapped, but if it was tapped, we would untap, and then you would note that you have an upkeep, even though nothing's happening, and then you draw. Okay, now we got something that we might want to play. Okay, we're going to go to our first main phase, and we're going to say I'm going to play an island. And depending on the colors our opponent's playing, or maybe a spell they've played, we may want to keep that 2 mana, because we've got now a mana, we got 2 mana producers, one that produces black and blue, and a blue one. We may want to counter spell. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to say I would end my turn here, actually, and then it would be my opponent's turn, because both cards that I could potentially play are instants, which means I can play them on my opponent's turn. So if they go to their turn and they play a spell I don't like, I can counter it. But if they play a spell that doesn't bother me, I would wait to the end of their turn and I would play this Brainstorm. So what a Brainstorm is it only costs 1 blue mana, and I can draw 3 cards, then put the 2 cards from my hand on top of my library in any order. So let's say they took their turn, they didn't play anything nasty. I'm going to say, at the end of your turn, I'm going to cast a Brainstorm. So I could tap either one of these, but I would tap this one because I only need a blue. I'm going to say I'm a Brainstorm. And then this card would resolve, and then it would go to the graveyard. And I keep my graveyard next to my library. So I'm going to go ahead and draw 3 cards. 1, 2, 3. Wow, they're all lands. I mean, it's good for early game, but I was hoping for a creature to play. So it says I drew 3 and I gotta put 2 cards from my hand on top of the library in any order. Wow, this is not a very good draw. But I think I would put the dual land, well, the land that produces dual mana in my hand, and put these 2 back on top. And I could put, potentially, I could put any of the cards in my hand, because I only have to put, it doesn't say which 2 cards to put on top of my library. So it's any, I could put any 2 cards from my library on top of my, from my hand on top of my library. So I could technically put the higher casting cost things there, or I could put the lands back. It's really up to you. Like, the game of Magic is all about choices, and whatever choices you make will determine the outcome of the game. Alright, so I'm gonna look for a creature now. Let's just say we're further on in the game and I drew a creature. You can't do this in a real game. You can't just go ahead and look at the cards in your library, but I'm doing it for the sake of my tutorial. Alright, so here's a creature. Alright, so let's say we're going to our next turn. And I'm going to play a land. Oh, so I untapped, and then I have nothing happening at my upkeep, and then I drew, and then I'm going to play my land, and let's just say it's 4th turn. And then I finally got a creature that I went to go look for. Let's just say I happen to draw it in the game, and it's a cephalid empress. So she costs 3 of any color and a blue. So I've got these lands. I've got 2 choked estuary, which produce a black and a blue, or black or a blue, I should say. And I've got an island and a swamp. So the island produces a blue and the swamp produces a black. But all I need is 1 blue and 3 of any other color. So it's my main phase. I'm going to tap 4 mana. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because altogether the mana value of this card is 4. And say I'm playing the cephalid empress. And when she enters the battlefield, or when she comes into play, those are 2 terms that are interchangeable. You return all blue creatures from your your opponents control to their owner's hands. And she says your opponents can't play blue creature spells. So she does pretty gross things. And she has summoning sickness now. I can't use her at the moment. But if I were able to attack, she would be able to do 2 damage, and she would be able to take 3 damage. Remember, because the front number is her power, and the back number is her toughness. So she's a pretty powerful card, but not a really big attacker. Alright, so I untapped, it's my upkeep, and then I drew. I'm going to play, and during my first main phase, I'm going to play a chill. And what that does is it makes red spells cost 2 more to play. So if my opponent was playing red spells, and say it only cost, let's just say 1 red, like this one costs 1 blue, it would cost 3 altogether. And making things more expensive to cast is one of the a good strategy in Magic. So what I'm doing is denying them normal play. Like they can't play blue creature spells, and red spells cost 2 more. So making the game more difficult for your opponent is always the way to go when you're trying to build a deck. Then I would say, depending on what they got on their board, like if I was done playing a spell in my main phase, I would say I'm going to combat. And then they can respond. Like they may have a spell that says there is no damage dealt this turn, or creatures can't attack this turn, or like there's many things that they could respond to your combat phase with. And so yeah, I would tell them I'm going to combat, and then you would announce you would declare your creature as an attacker. You say I'm going to attack you, or if they happen to have a planeswalker, your planeswalker with a 2/3. And some fun terms we use is on the ground, which means that the creature does not fly. And then if they have creatures, they can choose to block, and they can choose not to block. It's up to them. But if they really don't like this card, and they got a creature that is 3 power, they would definitely want to block. But if I knew they had a creature that was more powerful, I probably wouldn't send my creature over. And I tapped it to symbolize that it attacked. And a tapped creature cannot block. So if next turn your opponent would go to attack you, you have no untapped creatures to block with, you would have to take whatever damage they would want to deal to you. And then after that, I would say I end my turn, and if I had more than 7 cards in my hand, I would, which I don't, but if I did, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, so let's just say I had 8. I would have to choose which card that I feel that I won't need in this game. So right now I got a lot of land in my hand, and I want to keep the spells I have in my hand. So I would say I go to discard, and then I would discard a swamp, because I got a lot of blue cards in my hand, and I don't have anything that I would need a swamp for. Also at the end of turn, like if your opponent had blocked the creature you attacked with, let's say he blocked with a creature with a power of 1 and a toughness of 1. Well, let's say a toughness of 3. Let's say they blocked with a 1/3 creature. My creature could only deal 2 damage to the 1/3 creature they have, so it would survive. But that means that their 1/3 would have taken 2 damage from my creature. And at the end of turn, you remove all damage dealt to permanents. So it's just like they're born again. Like after your turn, they're healed. That's something special that I didn't want to forget to mention to you guys. I'll go over the turn phases one more time. So let's say it's my turn. I untap to my permanents, and then there's an upkeep. Nothing happens during the upkeep right now, and then I draw, and then I could go to my first main phase where I can play a land, and then if I wanted to, I could play this Snake Cult Initiation, which costs 4, and it's an enchantment. It's an aura. It enchants a creature. So I would say I'm playing a Snake Cult Initiation on my Cephalid Empress. So now she would have Poisonous 3. And the way I would symbolize that is that I would put the card underneath the creature. And then I would still have 1 blue mana open. So in this particular deck, I could wait to see what they're playing, and let's just say they're playing a red deck, and right now they can't play blue creature spells. I don't like that, so I'm gonna wait till it's their turn, and then I'm gonna play this instant. I'm gonna tap my 1 remaining blue mana, and I would say, you know what, you can't play red creature spells. I'm gonna change the text of this card, which just says you can't play blue creature spells, to red creature spells. See, because it says change the text of target permanent by replacing all instances of 1 color word or basic land type with another till end of turn. And then once that spell resolves, it would go to the graveyard. But yeah, that would be the end of my turn, and I think that's the end of my video. Thanks for watching. Talk to you guys later.